Welcome to part 2 of this tutorial. Hopefully you're here because you saw part 1 and you thought, I can get this, I can understand the logic behind this. You saw the flow chart, the way we use the modulus to give us a remainder, which allowed us to have some conditions that were met with certain numbers, and then we can now apply that logic to a programming syntax, in this case Python. We're going to use an iPad for this and an app called Pythonista, really great app. It runs a lot of Python code without any trouble, and it's about as good as you're going to get on an iPad environment. Super accessible. It's also an app for the phone, and I'm going to screencast this so you can see exactly what I do with the app, and then we're going to run it and you'll see the code run. So without any further ado, let's get started. Okay, this is Pythonista. It's a really great app. It works on iOS platforms, iPhone and iPad, and it's about as good as you're going to get. It's paid for, but it's well worth the asking price, and it's good for students and teachers alike. So I make a new script. I'm going to use iCloud storage, call it Fizzbuzz. Make sure there are no gaps, and I put version 2 because I had a little play with it earlier. Always end in py. Python files always end in py. I'm going to create that. Okay, so we've got this rather ominous looking screen with a console on the right. That will be the output of the code and program once we've got it. So that's the big advantage of having this Pythonista app. It's what we call an IDE, integrated development environment, for running your scripts. So we're going to start our code, and it's essentially the same as our flowchart. We're going to start with a loop for numbers in range. In this case, slightly different to what we wrote. We're going to put, let's put 50 numbers in. Now, we have to, if we want 50 numbers, we actually have to put 51 into here. And in the parameters inside here, we can actually change to have start, stop, and steps inside that range parameter. But we're just going to have one parameter in there, which is just the ending number. So for numbers in range up to 51, which is essentially counting to 50, we're going to ask it to check for a condition. So if numbers modulo 3, and this is where the syntax differs a bit from our flowchart. The equals actually, it needs to be a double equal sign, and so we've got two conditions, right? Numbers modulo 5 in this case equals 0. We need to use a colon at the end. Oh, let's put a space. Then we said say, didn't we? But in programming language, it's called print, or sometimes echo. We're going to print what we call a string, which is essentially just words. In this case, we're going to say Fizzbuzz. And then we're going to use a continue statement, which will, if that condition has been met, it will not do the rest of the loop code, but it will just go straight back to the top. If those two conditions are not met together, then it will carry on looking for other conditions if we tell it to. So we're going to use else if, which is abbreviated as elif. Numbers modulo 3 equals 0. And I'm just going to cheat a little bit to save time and copy and paste some code. Make sure that's indented correctly. So if modulo 3 with no remainders actually was, for number 3 would be, or 6 would be fizz. So that's the next condition, and continue would be, if that was met, then just go back to the top. Elif, let's make sure they're all in the same indent, because we're inside a loop at the moment. Let's change that to 5. Modulo 5, remainder 0. So this would be the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be the first one that meets this condition. And we say buzz. We're still in a loop. And if none of those conditions have been met, then we simply print numbers. But we're not saying numbers. We're actually printing... everything in Python is treated as what we call an object. So we're going to be printing the numbers that we see in the range of up to 50, 51. We're going to print that. We're not going to print what we call a string, which is above it. That's a string. That's a string. That's a string, which is that could be a sentence. It could be a paragraph, but that's something different. This is not a string. So let's see if this works, shall we? So clear and press play. Let's make sure it's running on run options. It should be run with 3.6. 3.6 is the latest version of Python. Okay, so it's actually used 0 as well. But 1, 2, fizz, that's good. 4, buzz, fizz, that's correct. And the first one that should be Fizzbuzz was 15. So that should be all the way up to 50. So we have it. The code works. So I hope you can see how relatively painless that is in terms of logic. Once you've applied the main logic for working out these conditions, the rest is actually fairly straightforward. It's a question of learning syntax and how the programming language wants you to tell it that these instructions. And Python's good because it doesn't really get in the way. The syntax is quite clear, it's logical. If you were saying the instructions out loud in class in a very abbreviated, pointed manner, you might actually start getting quite close to what a programming language might sound like if you were saying it. I mean, if you actually said this out loud, 4 numbers in range of 59 or 51, if numbers modulo 3 remainder equals 0 and the number modulo 5 equals remainder equals 0, those two conditions are met, then you say Fizzbuzz. And if that condition has been met, then you just continue with the next number. Elif or else if, else, then there might be another condition where modulo 3 remainder 0 is the only condition met. So 1, 2, fizz for buzz. Otherwise, at the end, you just print the number, whatever the number is, because if either of those conditions have not been met, then you simply print the number. So this is a great way of starting with the logic behind it, logic behind programming, going from that into a flowchart and start to break it down, what would actually happen, and then from the flowchart go to a piece of code. And it's just a question of learning the syntax for that particular language. I mean, you could do something similar in something like JavaScript, PHP, C. Every single programming language has got a for loop in it. The other type of loop would be a while loop. While a condition is met, while a condition is not met, you do something. Otherwise, for loops are very common to iterate over a range of something. Could be letters in a word, for example. But this would be a nice way if you just replicated this code. It would help you get yourself in position to learning programming, the basics of programming. And you could do this with the kids. You could do this in class. You could walk through the logic and talk about some of the syntax and break it down in class. Okay, hopefully you found this useful. Thanks guys, see you next time. Add a comment and any suggestions below. Thank you.